20 doctors couldn't save a kid, then the Muslim nurse saw what they had missed. We have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and become part of our dream too. The pediatric ICU had a way of swallowing sound. Monitors beeped, ventilators sighed, shoes squeaked on polished floors, yet under the fluorescent lights, everything felt strangely muted, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. In bed 7, 8-year-old Liam Carter lay impossibly small among the tangle of tubes and wires, his curls damp against the pillow, his chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. Around him, a circle of white coats stood like a ring of tired sentries. 20 doctors, from residents to specialists, had reviewed his chart, ordered scans, pushed medications, and still the same brutal truth hovered over the room: Liam was slipping away, and no one knew why. Dr. Marcus Ellery, the head of critical care, rubbed his temples as the team recited lab values in clipped voices. Blood pressure stable but low. Oxygen saturation fluctuating. No obvious infection markers. Imaging clear. The words blurred into a fog of data that refused to make sense. Liam had arrived 3 days earlier with a high fever, confusion, and sudden collapse. They'd ruled out meningitis, sepsis, brain tumor, hemorrhage. They treated him for what they could guess: possible autoimmune encephalitis, rare metabolic disorder, viral storm, throwing every protocol they could justify at the unknown enemy tearing through his tiny body. Nothing worked. Every hour, his muscles stiffened more, his eyes drifted further from focus, and the line between hope and resignation thinned. At the edge of the crowd, unnoticed, a woman in dark green scrubs stood with her clipboard pressed lightly to her chest. Nurse Amina Rahman wasn't part of the ring of white coats, but she'd been at Liam's bedside from the beginning, through the long nights of fever spikes, the whispered pleading of his mother, the terse conversations between specialists in the hall. Her navy hijab framed a face that was calm even when alarms blared, eyes that had learned, over a decade of night shifts and crowded wards, to see things exhaustion made others miss. She listened as Dr. Ellery spoke, her mind quietly tracing every detail she'd witnessed that never made it into the chart. "Let's repeat the panel and adjust the dose," Ellery finally said, his voice strained. "We must be missing something, but until we know what, supportive care is all we have." The team nodded, scattered to carry out orders, leaving the room in a wake of clipped footsteps and the faint smell of antiseptic. Liam's mother, Rachel, hovered near the head of the bed, fingers threaded through the boys, her eyes searching every face that left, as if any one of them might turn and say, "We've found it. He's going to be okay." None did. When the room emptied, it was just the nurse, the boy, and the mother's silent terror. Amina stepped closer, resetting a line, smoothing Liam's blanket, watching the slight tremor in his fingers, the faint discoloration along his jaw, the way his breathing changed when his mother whispered in his ear. "They're trying," Rachel said hoarsely, as if begging the nurse to confirm it. Amina met her eyes, steady and honest. "Yes," she said softly. "They are." She glanced back at the child. "So am I," she added silently, a quiet promise she had made to every patient who couldn't speak for themselves. She didn't know it yet, neither did the 20 doctors who had already walked away from the bed, but the clue that would save Liam's life had already passed before all of them. It was small, almost trivial, buried in habits and background noises. Only someone who lived close enough to the bedside to see the boy as more than a puzzle would notice. And that someone was her. Nurse Amina moved through her shift with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years balancing urgency and tenderness. She checked drips, adjusted ventilator settings within ordered parameters, reassured anxious parents, and charted everything with neat, precise handwriting. But with Liam, her focus lingered longer than usual. Something about his case unsettled her, not the severity of it, she'd seen worse, but the emptiness of the answers. The doctor's language kept circling the same phrases: unusual presentation, non-responsive to treatment, no clear etiology. Each of those sentences was a knot tightening in Amina's chest. Between tasks, she stood at his bedside and simply watched. Nurses were often the first to notice small things, because they were the ones who saw patients awake, asleep, crying, joking, trying to be brave, trying to fall apart. They didn't just see numbers, they saw patterns. Now, as Amina observed Liam, she noted tiny details that didn't fit neatly into the electronic record. The way his lips had a faint bluish tint even when his oxygen saturation looked acceptable. The way his fingers occasionally twitched in a pattern that didn't match typical seizure activity. The strange, sweet metallic tang she'd caught on his breath once, so faint she'd thought maybe she imagined it. On her short break, she sat in the staff lounge, unwrapping the sandwich her mother had packed for her that morning, flatbread, cucumber, and a smear of labneh, and scrolled through Liam's chart on the tablet balanced on her knees. Age, 8. Allergies, reported reaction to one common antibiotic in the past. Past medical history, mostly unremarkable. Lifestyle notes, mentioned briefly that he was picky eater, loved candy, often skipped breakfast. Her thumb hovered over a line that referenced a family history of early cardiac events on his father's side, but no one had made much of it. The focus had shifted so quickly to neurological causes that the rest seemed like background noise. Amina frowned. Medicine had taught her one cruel lesson: nothing about the body was ever background noise. Her colleague, Nurse Julia, dropped into the seat beside her, sighing heavily. "You're still thinking about bed 7, aren't you?" she asked, popping open a yogurt. Amina nodded. "He's not responding to anything. 20 doctors, and all we have are more questions." "Sometimes that's how it goes," Julia said softly. "You know that." "I know," Amina replied. "But I also know when something doesn't sit right." Julia studied her for a moment. "You have that look," she said. "The one you get right before you prove a room full of specialists wrong." Amina gave a faint smile. "I don't want to prove anyone wrong. I just want him to wake up." When her break ended, she washed her hands slowly, letting the cool water steady her thoughts. She glanced at the reflection in the mirror, tired eyes framed by a navy hijab, a small gold pin at the side with her name engraved in delicate script. She thought of the times people had mistaken her for an aide, a translator, anything but the senior nurse she was. She thought of how easily voices like hers could be dismissed as emotional, overinvested. She dried her hands, squared her shoulders, and stepped back into the corridor. If something about this case was wrong, she would find it, not because she outranked anyone, but because she was willing to stay at the bedside long enough to see what others had missed. She returned to Liam's room with that quiet resolve humming in her veins. Outside, storms of emails and consult pages raged between departments. Inside, one boy slept, one mother prayed, and one nurse decided she wasn't ready to give up yet. Night in the ICU always felt slightly haunted. Lights dimmed, footsteps softened, voices dropped to a hush. Outside the hospital windows, the city pulsed with taxis and streetlights, but in here, time moved differently. Machines set the rhythm, crises rewrote the hours. On this particular night, a heavy rain hammered the glass, turning the world beyond into a blurred smear of neon and darkness. Inside, Liam's monitors traced delicate green and yellow lines, each tiny peak and valley a fragile vote in favor of staying alive. Amina's shift stretched late into the night. She moved between patients, but every time she left Liam's room, something tugged her back. Shortly past midnight, as the ward settled into uneasy quiet, his heart rate suddenly spiked, alarms shrilling into the stillness. Amina was already halfway to his door when she heard Rachel's strangled cry. "Something's wrong. He's shaking." She rushed in to find Liam's small body tensing, his limbs jerking in a sharp, unnatural rhythm. For a terrifying moment, it looked like a seizure, but the pattern was off, not the full body, synchronized tightening she'd seen before, but uneven spasms, one side more affected than the other. "Call Dr. Ellery," she told the junior nurse on duty, her voice clear, controlled, even as her own heart hammered. She checked the airway, suctioned, adjusted his position, and hit the code button. Within seconds, the room filled again, doctors summoned from dim offices and on-call rooms, their faces drawn, their ties loosened. Orders flew. "Increase oxygen. Prepare another bolus. Check his glucose again." The crash cart stood ready, a silent thread in red plastic. Amina moved through the chaos with practiced precision, but as she followed commands, a thread of doubt kept pulling at her. This didn't look like a typical neurological crash. His blood pressure wavered but didn't plummet. His pupils reacted, not blown, his breathing pattern shifted, but not like the previous episodes. Something else was happening, and the answer wasn't on the algorithm taped to the wall. When the worst of the episode passed and Liam's body stilled again, the room exhaled in segments. "He's stable," someone muttered, more out of habit than conviction. The team lingered a few more minutes, then drifted out to deal with other patients, other emergencies. Dr. Ellery stayed behind, leaning against the wall, shoulders slumped. "We're fighting a ghost," he said under his breath. "Everything we hit, it slips around." Amina glanced at the four-pump, the ECG, the ventilator readouts, then at the small boy on the bed. She thought of the sweet metallic scent she had noticed before, faint but distinct, and something inside her clicked. "Doctor," she said carefully, "do you think this could be metabolic? Something with the way his body is processing what we're giving him?" Ellery shook his head, too tired for new theories. "We've run the panels. His numbers don't fit the classic profiles. We're already at the edge of what we can justify." She hesitated. "But what if the problem isn't what we're not giving him," she said slowly, "but what we are?" He frowned, not angry, just exhausted. "We're following best practices, Ramon. Get some rest. You've been here too long." He left, leaving her alone with the boy and the steady, accusing beep of the monitor. Amina stood there for a long time, watching the slight rise and fall of his chest. Her instincts, honed over years of listening to the quietest signals, screamed that they were missing something right in front of them. She stepped closer, gently pushing back a strand of hair from Liam's forehead. His skin was clammy, but his cheeks held a strange flush, uneven in patches. She lifted his hand, noticing a subtle tremor even in sleep, and the faintest smell again, not exactly fruity, not exactly metallic, but wrong. She'd seen something like this once before, years ago, in a different hospital, a different city, a different child. A case that had haunted her for weeks after. Back then, no one listened to her. That child didn't make it. A chill ran through her. She wasn't going to let history repeat itself. The next morning, when the day shift took over and the night's alarms turned into paperwork and rounds, Amina requested to stay a few extra hours. Technically, she should have gone home, collapsed into bed, let someone else take over. But every time she imagined leaving, she saw Liam's uneven color and those strange, jerky spasms. She'd learned to respect the voice that whispered when something was wrong, even when it didn't yet have the right words. Rachel sat slumped in the visitor's chair, an untouched coffee cooling by her elbow. Her eyes were hollow from 3 nights without real sleep, her hair pulled back in a careless knot. Amina walked in quietly, checked the monitors, then pulled a stool beside her. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly, "can we talk a little about Liam before he got sick?" Rachel blinked, brittle. "Did they send you to tell me something?" she asked, fear sharpening her voice. "Is he worse?" "No," Amina said quickly. "He's stable. Sometimes details from before help us understand now. I want to make sure we're not missing anything." The mother stared at her, as if weighing whether to trust her. Most people directed their questions to the doctors, not nurses. But something about Amina's steady gaze, the way she spoke with gentle clarity, loosened the knot in her chest. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "What do you want to know?" They talked. Not about lab results or imaging, but about life. About how Liam loved sour candy and hated vegetables. How he had fainted once after a long soccer practice in the heat. How his father, who had died 2 years ago, had heart problems, though Rachel didn't know the medical terms. How, in the week before he collapsed, he'd been more tired than usual, complaining his legs hurt, his head felt foggy. Amina took notes, not rushing, occasionally repeating small details to make sure she'd heard right. Then Rachel mentioned something almost in passing, the way people do when they don't think it matters. He started this new energy powders drink," she said, frowning. Some influencer advertised it online. Said it helped kids focus and have more energy. He begged me to buy it, and I thought it couldn't hurt. It was labeled natural. But he loved it. Put it in his water every day after school. Amina's pen stopped mid-sentence. How long has he been taking it? About 3 weeks, Rachel answered. I didn't think, she swallowed. Do you think that's it? I checked the label, it looked harmless. Amina's mind raced. Unregulated supplements. Unknown ingredients. Additives that could stress a child's already fragile metabolism. Combined with a genetic predisposition, that vague heart problem in his father, and the medications they'd been pumping into him, the cocktail could be disastrous. Suddenly, the odd symptoms, the sweet metallic breath, the tremors, the uneven reaction to therapy, didn't look random anymore. They looked like a pattern. Do you still have the powder? Amina asked. Rachel nodded. In my bag. I brought it the second day, but no one asked to see it. I thought they were focused on bigger things. Her voice broke on the last words. Amina reached out, squeezing her hand briefly. Sometimes, she said quietly, the small things are the bigger things. She took the container reverently when Rachel handed it over, bright packaging, flashy fonts, promises of natural focus and clean energy. She scanned the ingredients list, her eyes catching on a few compounds she recognized as potentially risky in high doses. Others she didn't recognize at all. Unregulated didn't mean harmless. Clutching the container and her notes, she stood. I need to show this to Dr. Ellery, she said. Now. As she walked down the corridor, the supplement jar cold in her hand, she felt the familiar friction rise, the resistance that came whenever a nurse tugged at threads physicians thought they'd already tied down. But she didn't slow. If she was right, every minute they continued treating the wrong problem was another minute Liam's body fought not just his illness, but their interventions. She knocked once on the team room door, then stepped inside, her expression leaving no room for dismissal. Doctor, she said, placing the jar and her notes on the table, I think we've all been looking in the wrong place. Dr. Ellery sat hunched over the conference table, surrounded by stacks of reports, empty coffee cups, and a half-eaten protein bar. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his patience was running thin after 3 days of unanswered questions. When Amina entered with purposeful steps, he barely looked up, until she placed the bright container of energy powder in front of him with a quiet but unmistakable finality. We missed this, she said. He blinked at the jar, confused. What is that? A supplement Liam's been drinking every day, Amina replied, sliding her notes toward him. His mother bought it online. Unregulated. Marketed to kids. Her tone was calm, but the urgency beneath it pulsed like a second heartbeat. His symptoms matched metabolic overload and chemical toxicity. Not infection. Not autoimmune disease. This may be the trigger, and the treatments we've given him are making it worse. Ellery frowned, picking up the jar. Even if it contributed, we've already run panels. Panels based on assumptions, Amina said gently but firmly. We keep looking for what should be wrong, not what is wrong. Look at these ingredients. She pointed at 2 unfamiliar compounds, their chemical names long and harmless sounding. These are stimulants. And these, she tapped the last item, can cause lactic acidosis and severe metabolic imbalance in children, especially with genetic predispositions. Ellery's expression shifted from skepticism to curiosity to dawning alarm. Doctor. Liam's father died young from a heart issue. No one investigated genetic metabolic disorders. She opened her notebook to her detailed observations, the sweet metallic breath, the strange spasms, the uneven responses. He fits the entire profile. And now the medications we gave him, especially the steroids, could be worsening the metabolic collapse. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Ellery sat up straighter. If you're right. I am, Amina said quietly. No arrogance. Just certainty born of experience and intuition. We need to run a targeted metabolic panel immediately and begin detox support. If we wait, her voice wavered, we may lose him tonight. Ellery looked at her, a long, weighted gaze. For the first time since this nightmare began, something in him softened, not defeat, but respect. You caught this, he said. Not any of us. You. He stood abruptly. Let's move. Within seconds, the quiet room exploded into motion. Orders were issued. Labs notified. Toxicology paged. A special metabolic team summoned. Nurses sprinted down the corridor. Charts updated in real time. This time, the urgency felt different, not desperate, but directioned. And as they rushed back toward Liam's room, Amina whispered a small prayer under her breath, the one she always whispered when life hung in fragile balance. Not asking for a miracle. Asking for clarity. Because now, for the first time, they were finally fighting the right enemy. The results came back faster than anyone anticipated, partly because Dr. Ellery had marked the order stat, partly because every lab tech in the building now knew that an 8-year-old boy's life hinged on this mystery. Amina stood beside the monitor as the numbers populated across the screen, each result flashing in red, yellow, or an ominous shade of orange. As she read them, her breath caught. It was worse than she'd feared, and exactly what she had suspected. The metabolic panel showed sky-high lactate levels, severe metabolic acidosis, and abnormal concentrations of compounds that should never have been in a child's bloodstream. But the real shock was at the bottom of the page, a flag marker indicating a rare, inherited metabolic disorder, one that prevented the body from breaking down certain chemical stimulants found in the supplement. Mixed with strenuous activity, stress, and the medications he had been given, the cocktail had pushed Liam into near-fatal metabolic collapse. Dr. Ellery stared at the results, jaw tight, face pale. My God, he whispered. We've been treating the wrong thing this entire time. Amina nodded, her voice low but unwavering. We were making him worse. His body wasn't failing, it was drowning in toxins it couldn't process. The room went silent. Not the silence of resignation, but the silence that comes just before action, the inhale before the sprint. Ellery straightened, his voice suddenly sharp with command. We need detox support right now. Get metabolic buffers. Adjust his fluids. No steroids. No sedatives. And notify the metabolic specialist, tell him it's urgent. Amina was already moving, her hands smooth, precise. She switched 4 lines, recalibrated pumps, and prepared the detox infusion with practiced speed. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, but her fingers never trembled. She'd done this before, helped save children the system overlooked. Children whose symptoms were dismissed as rare, unlikely, not textbook. As the antidote drip began to flow into Liam's veins, his monitors flickered, numbers wavering, stabilizing, dipping, rising. The room held its breath. Rachel clung to the doorframe, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. Is he getting worse? Amina turned to her, softening her voice. No. This is his body responding. This is what should have been happening from the beginning. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then something changed. His breathing eased, just a little. His heart rhythm settled, slightly, but unmistakably. His skin tone shifted, less mottled, more alive. A tear slipped down Amina's cheek before she could stop it. We've got him, she whispered. We finally have him. Ellery exhaled a breath he must have been holding for days. Nurse Rahman, you saved his life. But Amina shook her head gently. No. He saved himself. I just listened. Yet everyone in the room knew the truth. 20 doctors had missed it. One nurse saw what none of them did. And the boy who had been slipping away was finally, turning back toward life. The first hours after starting detox were the most fragile, a tightrope between hope and collapse. Every nurse on shift felt the tension humming through the ICU, but none more than Amina. She had stationed herself at Liam's bedside without being asked, her posture straight, her eyes trained on each shifting number across the monitors. Even when she stepped back to chart, she kept one hand on the rail of the bed, as if grounding the child back into the world. The infusion worked slowly, peeling back layers of toxicity that had been building inside Liam's body for weeks. As the chemicals broke down, they flooded his system with byproducts that sent ripples across every organ. That meant fluctuations, dips in oxygen, spikes in heart rate, brief tremors that flickered like lightning beneath his skin. Nurses came and went to assist, but every time an alarm chimed, it was Amina who reached the bedside first, her calm presence anchoring the chaos. Rachel sat in the chair beside her son, curled forward as if praying into his mattress. The dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of nights spent bargaining with silence. Occasionally, she would look up at Amina with a mixture of fear and something new, a fragile, hesitant hope that hadn't existed an hour earlier. "He looks different," she whispered once. "Is that good?" Amina gave her a gentle nod. "His body is fighting the right battle now. That makes all the difference." But privately, as she stepped away to wash her hands for the 50th time, she admitted to herself that this night could still go either way. Detox could overwhelm a weakened system. The damage from days of misdiagnosed treatment was still unfolding. And the rare genetic disorder they'd uncovered wasn't something that reversed with a single intervention. It was a lifelong condition, one that required a map they were only just beginning to draw. As the hours passed, the ward fell into that deep, eerie stillness that only hospitals know. Lights dimmed to soft amber glows. Footsteps were few and soft. Outside, the storm that had raged earlier dissolved into the quiet hiss of passing cars on wet pavement. Inside room 7, the soft hum of the detox pump, the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator, and the occasional beeping of recalibrating monitors created a lullaby no parent ever imagined praying for. Around 3 a.m., Liam's numbers began to trend, gently, but consistently, in the right direction. His oxygen saturation held steady. His heart rhythm found a more regular cadence. The tremors subsided into faint twitches. Amina leaned closer, brushing her fingertips lightly across his wrist, feeling the warmth returning to his hands. "Come on, little one," she murmured, hardly realizing she'd spoken aloud. Rachel lifted her head. Do you think he can hear you?" Amina smiled softly. "Sometimes I think patients hear more than we know." The hours stretched into dawn. At 5:30 a.m., a thin ribbon of gray light seeped through the half-closed blinds, turning the room silver. Amina, exhausted but alert, leaned against the counter reviewing the latest vitals when she saw it, the smallest change, subtle enough that anyone else might have missed it. Liam's hand twitched. Not in the jerky, unnatural way of before, but slowly, intentionally. "Rachel," Amina said gently, stepping closer. The mother looked up, eyes swollen and raw. "Take his hand." Rachel reached out, barely breathing, and wrapped her fingers around her son's. A tiny squeeze answered her. A sound between a sob and a laugh tore from Rachel's chest as she collapsed forward, pressing her forehead to their joined hands. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "He's still here," she cried. "My baby is still here." Amina blinked hard, swallowing the lump in her throat. It wasn't a miracle. It was medicine done right. It was listening. It was refusing to give up when everyone else did. But in that quiet, silver-washed room, it felt like a miracle. And the night that had begun with desperation ended with the first fragile hint of dawn, not outside the window, but in the small, intentional movement of a child choosing to come back. Morning sunlight filtered into the ICU with a kind of gentleness that felt almost deliberate, as if the universe itself had decided to tread softly around room 7. Overnight, nurses whispered updates at the door instead of speaking inside. Doctors moved with more caution, checking charts twice, then 3 times. A certain reverence settled over the staff, not loud or celebratory, but quiet and full of awe. Because after days of spiraling decline, something had finally shifted. Something fragile. Something hopeful. Amina had stayed far past the end of her shift. Technically, she shouldn't still be there. Her badge had already logged her out hours earlier, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. Fatigue pressed at her temples, but adrenaline and purpose held her upright. She stood at the foot of Liam's bed as the metabolic team filed into the room, led by Dr. Victor Halden, a stoic man with sharp eyes and a reputation for solving cases most hospitals labeled unsolvable. He scanned the monitor, then the detox line, then Liam himself. "Vitals are stabilizing," he murmured, sounding both impressed and cautious. "He's responding. Whoever caught the metabolic angle, good work." Ellery stepped aside, nodding toward Amina. That was her. Halden's gaze shifted to her, assessing. "A nurse caught this?" Amina straightened slightly, not defensive, but dignified. "I've seen a similar case before. And the symptoms didn't align with neurological collapse." Halden studied her for a long moment, then nodded with a kind of quiet respect. "Well done," he said. "You saved him from going further into metabolic crisis." Coming from a specialist known for rarely praising anyone, it meant something. But Amina didn't bask in it. Her attention remained fixed on the boy in the bed, his chest rising and falling in a steadier rhythm, the faint warmth coloring his cheeks, the pulse monitor tracing a stronger beat. Rachel sat nearby, clutching her son's hand so gently she seemed afraid of disturbing the fragile balance. Her eyes, puffy from crying, lifted to the doctor's. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Halden clasped his hands behind his back. "Now we continue detox, support his metabolism, and let his body recover. The worst appears to be behind us. But he will need lifelong monitoring. This underlying disorder is real, and now that we know it's there, we'll make sure he gets the treatment he's needed since birth." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes again, but this time, they were tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank all of you." Halden's expression softened as he glanced at Amina. "You should thank her first." Rachel turned fully to Amina then, and for the first time since entering the hospital, she let herself hope without fear. She stood, stepped forward, and wrapped her arms around the nurse in a trembling, grateful embrace. "You brought my son back," she sobbed into Amina's shoulder. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't have words." Amina returned the embrace gently. "You don't need words, Rachel. Just be here for him when he wakes up." Minutes later, the room quieted again. Nurses drifted in and out, adjusting lines, updating charts, running small assessments. Amina stayed near the bedside, watching the small, subtle changes only she would notice. The color in his fingertips. The softness returning to his face. The little shifts in his breathing that signaled his brain was slowly re-engaging. Then, at 9:16 a.m., something happened, something as delicate as a butterfly landing on a leaf. Liam's eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. A longer tremble. Rachel gasped, dropping to her knees beside the bed. "Baby? Baby, can you hear me?" His fingers twitched again, then curled faintly toward hers. A doctor rushed to the bedside, checking reflexes, shining a small light toward his pupils. "He's responding," he confirmed, excitement creeping into his tone. "He's moving toward consciousness." But Amina didn't need the flashlight or the clinical markers to tell her that. She had already seen the unmistakable shift, the spark of returning awareness. It was the moment every parent begged for, every nurse prayed for, every doctor fought for. And as the morning sun warmed the room, Liam took the smallest but most important step back toward life, guided by the hands of a nurse who refused to let his story end in silence. News travels fast inside hospitals, but it travels even faster when it involves a story that defies every expectation. By mid-morning, whispers had rippled across departments, pediatrics, toxicology, emergency medicine, even administrative floors. Staff paused in hallways, exchanging wide-eyed glances and half-finished sentences. The boy in ICU woke up. Metabolic collapse, caught by a nurse. 20 doctors missed it. She saved him. But Amina paid little attention to the murmuring tide. Her focus remained fixed on the boy whose eyelids now fluttered with growing intention, as if the world were calling him back piece by piece. She stood beside Rachel, who had not let go of her son's hand once, her emotions flickering between disbelief, joy, and exhaustion so deep it settled into her bones. Doctors from the metabolic team rotated through the room, checking vitals and neurological responses, speaking in low, careful tones. Each new check painted the same picture: progress. Real, measurable progress. Liam responded to stimuli, weakly but purposefully. He squeezed fingers. His pupils tracked movement. And every time he did, Rachel cried softly, her tears falling onto the blanket like drops of grace. Dr. Ellery entered the room around noon. The night's tension had drained from his face, replaced by something quieter: humility. He approached Amina with a hesitant breath, his posture more tentative than she had ever seen. "Nurse Rahman," he began, his voice low, "I owe you an apology. I dismissed your concern. Your instincts. And because of that, we lost precious time." Amina shook her head gently. "We all did what we thought was right with the information we had. What matters is that we know now." Ellery looked down, almost ashamed. "No. What matters is that you saw what none of us did. You trusted your judgment when the rest of us trusted the chart. If you hadn't pushed, we would have lost him." A hush settled between them, not awkward, but profound. In the medical world, admitting fault was rare. Admitting fault to a nurse was rarer still. "Thank you," he said simply. Not as a superior. Not as a colleague. But as a man whose pride had been outmatched by truth. Before Amina could respond, a sudden commotion rose outside the door, quiet at first, then building as footsteps clustered and voices murmured with excitement. A hospital communications officer appeared, clutching a clipboard. "Dr. Ellery," she said breathlessly, "is it true? The boy with the unexplained collapse, he's waking up?" Ellery stiffened. "Yes, but we're not making a statement." "Not yet." "But the regional press already heard," the officer pressed. "Someone from toxicology leaked the story. 20 doctors failed, nurse solves case. Reporters are gathering outside." Amina exhaled sharply. "No. This isn't about me. And the family doesn't need reporters right now." Rachel, overhearing, looked panicked. "Please. I can't handle media. Not now. Not while he's still fragile." Amina moved immediately to her side, reassuring. "There will be no cameras at this door. I promise." Ellery turned to the communications officer, his expression firm. "Shut it down. No interviews. No photos. No access to the ICU. If anyone tries to come in, security escorts them out." The officer hesitated. "But—" "No," Amina said gently, but with a finality that surprised even her. "This is a child fighting for his life. That comes first." The officer nodded, subdued, and hurried away. Inside the room, peace returned, fragile, but whole. At 12:47 p.m., something extraordinary happened. Liam's lips parted. His eyelids lifted. And his gaze, cloudy, confused, but undeniably conscious, drifted toward the figure leaning over him. Rachel gasped, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "Liam? Baby?" The boy's eyes fluttered again, then found hers. Mom?" His voice was barely a breath, a faint tremor of sound, but it carried enough strength to break every heart in the room. Rachel collapsed forward in sobbing relief, kissing his forehead, whispering prayers, clutching him gently as if afraid he'd vanish if she let go. Amina turned away, blinking back tears, giving the family their moment. Behind her, Ellery wiped at his eyes discreetly. Even the most seasoned specialists weren't immune to moments like these, moments when medicine and miracle intertwined until they were indistinguishable. And although no reporters were allowed inside, the truth still spread through the hospital like wildfire, not in headlines, but in reverent whispers. A nurse saved him. A nurse solved what 20 doctors couldn't. A nurse gave a family back their child. But Amina didn't hear any of it. She stood in the corner, hand pressed to her heart, whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude. For the boy. For the truth. For the moment the world finally realized what she carried every day. That the smallest voice in the room can sometimes be the one that saves a life. The next day dawned with a clarity the hospital hadn't felt in weeks. Sunlight filtered through the atrium windows, stretching long beams across the floors, as if the world outside sensed that something remarkable had happened within these walls. The ICU, usually thick with quiet dread and urgency, felt lighter, still intense, still demanding, but touched by a kind of reverence that only life regained could bring. Liam was awake. Groggy, weak, drifting in and out of short pockets of awareness, but awake. Rachel sat beside him, her fingers brushing through his curls, whispering soft reassurances each time his eyelids fluttered open. Every breath he took seemed to fill her with new strength, as though she too had been suffocating the past few days and could finally inhale again. Doctors adjusted treatments, recalibrated his detox regimen, and spoke to her in calmer tones. For the first time, their words carried hope instead of hesitation. Amina watched all of this from her quiet corner of the room, a gentle presence rather than a commanding one. She didn't need recognition, she never had. Seeing him alive, seeing him return to the world he nearly left, was more than enough. But the world outside had other plans. At 9 a.m., while Amina finished charting Liam's overnight progress, the doors to the ICU swung open. In walked hospital director Helen Brooks, escorted by 2 administrators and a pair of security officers. Brooks was known for her poise, sharp, decisive, rarely flustered. Yet this morning, something in her eyes reflected both awe and urgency. "Nurse Rahman," she said softly, approaching her. "Can we speak for a moment?" Amina nodded, stepping aside near the window. She expected a lecture about protocol or perhaps an update on the press situation. Instead, Director Brooks took a slow breath and met her gaze with something she had rarely shown any staff member, deep respect. "I've reviewed the case," she said. "Every note. Every order. Every action taken." She paused, voice thickening slightly. "You saved that boy's life. Not by luck. Not by chance. But by refusing to ignore what others overlooked." Amina shook her head humbly. "I just did what any nurse would." "No," Brooks interrupted. "You did what only a few would. You trusted your instincts. You stood up when you could have stayed silent. And because of you, a family still has their child." A silence hung between them, a silence filled with truth. Brooks continued, "The board is going to acknowledge your work publicly. Not for sensationalism, but because people, patients, families, staff, deserve to know the impact a single nurse can have." Amina hesitated. "I don't want media attention. Or awards. Please. Protect the family's privacy first." Brooks smiled softly. "Already done. The statement will be internal. A recognition of your contribution, and," she held out a sealed envelope, "a recommendation for advancement. You've earned it." Amina accepted the envelope with trembling hands. She didn't open it. She didn't need to know what it said yet. In her chest, something warm bloomed, not pride, but gratitude. Gratitude that someone finally understood what nurses lived every day, that they were not backup. They were backbone. Moments later, when she stepped back into Liam's room, she found him awake again, more awake than before. His voice, still hoarse, whispered, "Hi." Rachel let out a shaky laugh filled with joy and heartbreak. "Hi, baby." Amina approached the bedside, smiling gently. "Welcome back, Liam." He blinked up at her, then reached out a small hand. She took it without hesitation. "You were here," he whispered, as if piecing together the memory through fog. "You stayed." Amina's throat tightened. "Yes," she said softly. "I stayed." The room fell quiet, peaceful, whole. Later that afternoon, as Amina finally prepared to leave after what felt like the longest shift of her life, she paused at the ICU doors. Behind her, monitors beeped softly, doctors murmured updates, and a little boy began the slow path back to his life, all because someone listened when no one else did. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed. A message from Julia, her closest friend on staff. "Everyone's talking about you. You made history today." Amina typed back. "No. Liam did. We just helped him find his way back." And with that, she walked down the corridor, exhausted, humbled, and changed, forever marked by a truth she had always known but the world had only just learned. Sometimes, it's the quietest person in the room who carries the loudest miracle. If you made it this far, subscribe, leave your like, and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you, and see you next time.